Yet again, our deepest sympathy to the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. But as we speak this morning, in this moment, I ask us to ask ourselves who is needed on this journey. Heads of state, heads of government, yes. Ministers and ministries of finance, yes. But above all else, the individual citizens of this world. And that is why the United Nations has sought to ask us to remember the to-do list. Because in each of our lives every day, we make commitments about things that we must complete to make our lives better. And so we are asked today to do the same in this world, which is at a critical juncture in the affairs of man. We have seen, regrettably, a world that has reminded us that there is no right to life, that there is no right to success, that there is no right to ensuring that there can be prosperity. And regrettably, in seeing that, we have failed to lay the foundations that will allow us to continue to see the people who become the victims of hunger, to feel the people who become the victims of no education, to appreciate that a world that is driven by a climate crisis cannot provide a sustainable future for us. Are we so arrogant as to believe that there will be no failed societies and no extinct species, when the history shows us otherwise? I ask us this morning to let us speak to the citizens of the world. Let us speak to the citizens of the world, the boys and girls who we want in this battle to remind their leaders, to remind their parents, to remind their head teachers, to remind each other that they are necessary to join the army to fight against poverty. The first goal, end poverty. The second goal, to make sure that people can eat and that we end hunger. The third goal, to make sure that we can deliver good health for all. The fourth, to provide quality education so that people can think for themselves and lay a platform on which they can build for themselves. The fifth, to achieve gender equality so that whether it is a boy or a girl, or whatever gender you assume, that you have the right to live in this world without fear of discrimination and with opportunities equal to all others. And the staff of life, water, to ensure that there's water for all. How can that be something that the global community doesn't fight for? Or clean energy, because we have seen just now in the video what an abundant reliance on fossil fuels and an industrial revolution has done for us. And yes, for people of color, we say that we are now the victims of double jeopardy because our blood, sweat, and tears brought about the Industrial Revolution. And for too many of us now, we are on the front line of the climate crisis. And how do we get through when we speak to you as young people? We ask you to go for education. This assembly will speak today about the importance of transforming education so that you can be the best that you can be. But that is ultimately so that you can support yourself. Because freedom is about choice. And to have that choice, you need jobs. And that's what the to-do list at number 8 tells us. To support also those jobs, we need sustainable infrastructure. And we need to be innovative in this world where technology is moving at the rapid rate at which it is moving. And in all these things, as His Excellency Emperor Haile Selassie stood here and said, we need to fight inequality. If not, there shall be war. We need also to make sure that the environment within which we live, particularly in cities, when people come in their millions and their thousands and their hundreds to cities, that the cities can provide life for them because their actions and living is sustainable. And every day we use things. And you, more than anyone else, as children, can lead the world in a waste-free world, in a world that recognizes that if we take the plastics and we take the things that we just use and throw away, that they have to go somewhere. But you, the children, can lead the revolution to changing our habits. And if you change those habits, then the to-do list of protecting the oceans and protecting life on land becomes a little easier. But we can't do that unless we also tackle the climate crisis. And those who must be on the front line must be those who expect to be living 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now. My friends, and if we can do all of that, and if we can ensure fairness by ensuring that we can end conflict and we can end corruption, and we can tell the world that we don't want only to talk about the ending of conflict in the Ukraine. We want conflict ended in Tigray. We want conflict ended in Syria. We want conflict ended wherever it raises its head in the world. We want also conflict ended when it appears to be under the guise of criminality, like it is in Haiti. We want you, my friends, the children of this world, to hold us, the governments, accountable, and to recognize that we do have choice, and leaders can make decisions, and leaders are not constrained in the decisions that we make, and that everything does not depend on financing, although it is absolutely critical. And we will fight for financing, as I will speak later this week about, for the reform of the international financial architecture. But even without that, there are things that you and I can do. And we ask you, the children of this world, to hold our feet to the fire and make this world a better place to live in. Thank you.
Excellencies and friends, good morning. My name is Sherwin Bryce-Pease. It is widely acknowledged that women have been amongst the worst affected by the economic impacts of COVID-19 and the current global cost of living crisis. Existing inequalities have been exacerbated, and women have been pushed out of the labor force and into poverty and extreme poverty at higher rates than men across the globe. What has been less visible is a focus on investment in women as a solution. In this SDG moment, we are starting this SDG 10 Reducing Inequalities dialogue that we hope will spark shifts in perception and accelerate action. Joining us today are Rebecca Greenspan, the Secretary General of the UN Conference on Trade and Development, who has been co-leading the work stream on financing for the Global Crisis Response Group, Agnes Kalibata, the President of AGRA, Sustainably Growing Africa's Food Systems, and who was the Secretary General's Special Envoy for the 2021 Food Systems Summit. Melinda French Gates, philanthropist, global advocate for women and girls, and the co-chair of the Gates Foundation and founder of Pivotal Ventures. I have to take my seat in 3 seconds. There are now decades of evidence highlighting that investing in women, removing barriers to labor force participation, and closing gender gaps in the economy has direct translation to positive macroeconomic outcomes. Projection models highlight that simply achieving parity in the labor force would unlock trillions for global GDP and accelerate economic growth, just achieving parity. These impacts are significant across the board, but particularly where inequalities are the greatest. Rebecca, in response to the triple food crisis, energy and finance, the UN Secretary General established a global crisis response group to provide evidence, analysis, and policy recommendations. What are some of the urgent actions the international community can take as we grapple and face this emergency?
Thank you very much. Let me first say that as the Secretary General, we are challenged by cascading crises. But cascading crisis is also cascading inequalities. And women and girls are the hardest hit when this happens. And so we have to know that we have a health crisis that is not over, that we have a climate crisis that is getting worse, and we have a debt crisis that is in the horizon. 60% of low-income countries and 30% of middle-income countries are in debt distress. So that is what we need to tackle. And on top of that, we have a cost of living crisis. Prices of food, of energy are as high as they can be. So what do we have to do? Today, we have a cost of living crisis that is a crisis of affordability. So we need prices to come down, and we need liquidity to go up. For tomorrow, the crisis of affordability can become a crisis of availability. Without enough fertilizers, next year's harvest will be unable to feed the world. So we need enough liquidity for social protection for all, precisely to avoid this socioeconomic crisis, and we need to make fertilizers available for the world, especially for the small farmers. So just to finish, we need to bring prices down, but we need also financial availability for the liquidity of countries to go up, for their fiscal space to widen, so countries can get social protection for their poor and vulnerable.
All right, we'll come back to you in a second, Rebecca. Last year's UN Food Systems Summit was truly a watershed moment. Agnes, the world was working to make food systems more resilient, and suddenly we were faced with a global food crisis, right? Almost prescient that you had that summit last year. From fertilizer to inflation, what have we learned that we can take to scale in countries, particularly through the leadership of women?
Thank you. I guess one of the biggest lessons coming from the Food Systems Summit is the fact that these crises are not going anywhere. So we saw the COVID crisis immediately, followed by the crisis we just talked about. But let's step back and remember that in Africa, for example, women, farmers, and farmers in general were living through crises one after the other, whether it is the droughts that started back in 2012, whether it is the fall armyworm and all these other things, the pests that they have to deal with every day. So what the Food Systems Summit did for us was to bring people together, to bring context from different parts of the world together and give us a chance to look at some of the challenges that people that are living on the edges of food system working with, and the opportunity to actually give us a chance to prioritize, to start prioritizing on how to deal with vulnerabilities in our system. So if you look at most of the countries that stepped forward, the number one thing that they were trying to address is vulnerabilities in the food system. The number two thing they were trying to address is the challenge and question of jobs in the food system. So for example, the African continent stepped forward with a common position, and if African countries implemented that common position, we wouldn't then have a challenge around jobs and around vulnerability, because that was the number one thing that they talked about. Even here in the US, the government put forward vulnerabilities and addressing the challenges of women as number one. So if countries could only take forward the 112 strategies that they put forward, that prioritize women, that prioritize youth, that prioritize vulnerabilities in our system that were put forward by COVID-19, the world would be a different place. Right. So my call is, let's go forward, implement those strategies that were put forward, but also private sector and civil society did step forward in a really interesting way. everybody was determined to find action. So if we can only come through on those actions.
Yeah, solutions are one issue, right? Implementation, of course, a completely other. Melinda, you have, over the years, been one of the fiercest proponents of the need to invest in women to build a better world for everyone and to accelerate sustainable and equitable economic growth. And you have actioned this yourself, investing millions of women in women entrepreneurs, in investors and leaders, literally putting her money where her mouth is. Can you tell us why investing in women is really the solution?
Well, we need to stop talking about empowering women. We need to just make sure women have power. And that means not...
Say it again.
Let's stop talking about empowering women and make sure they just have their power. So it's not just putting food on the table, it's making the decisions around that table. It's not just being a recipient of good government policy, it's sitting at the table when government policy is made. What we know is that women are force multipliers. When they have their full decision-making authority, they have their bodily autonomy, and they fully participate in society, everything gets better. We know from great research, their families are healthier, their children are in school, the families are wealthier. So we should want this as society, and yet it's always been this nice-to-do agenda. I grew up in a house where my mom said, make sure you set your own agenda or somebody else will. So our agenda is making sure women have their full power. So during COVID-19, we saw some fantastic programs, for instance, where cash was put into women's wallets, their digital wallets. It had a much bigger effect than if you just gave them cash, because the women had decision-making authority. Their husband or their father-in-law couldn't get to the money. We saw women in Uganda take the money, invest it in their businesses, and their businesses were 15% more profitable. We saw women in Niger go to the market and tell us they could go to the market because the assets were protected. So we need to make sure women have money to have power. Money is power, and when they have money, they unlock all kinds of other benefits for their families, their societies, and frankly, the global economy.
All right, second round, 90 seconds each, please. So many of us are feeling the effects of the cost of living crisis, right? Me, you, everybody. Rebecca, how do we create fiscal space for struggling countries so that we can help families avoid impossible choices like paying for food or paying for heat and get back on track to keeping the promise of these SDGs? 90 seconds.
Yeah, so we need the international financial institutions to really use their deep pockets to make liquidity available for the countries.
This is a big fight, right?
Yes, that's a big fight. But the instruments are there. We can use the instruments we have. The money is already there. They can use it to cushion the blow of what is happening. And we need the countries to have the social protection programs that will allow for women to have the cash, to have the money, and for the households to be able to face this crisis. They cannot face it alone. They have less possibility to cope today because of the cascading crisis, because we are after COVID-19. So countries and households have less possibility to cope alone today. And let me just say that precisely the SDGs is our main instrument to call for solidarity and cooperation. That's what we need today, solidarity and cooperation, and to support the Secretary General in his fight to bring more food and more fertilizers to the market to stabilize prices and be able to make it available for the people of the world.
And as you push for solidarity, we must acknowledge that sometimes consensus is very difficult to achieve in a room like this. Melinda, the issue of the care...
Difficult but not impossible.
Difficult but not impossible. Melinda, the issue of the care economy and unpaid and underpaid care really came to the surface during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Recent figures show that school and daycare closures in 2020 led to an estimated 512 billion additional hours of unpaid childcare globally, not for men, but for women. Even before COVID-19, economists projected that we would lose trillions each year from the formal economy by not valuing the unpaid care work undertaken mainly by women. You advocated strongly for significant investments in care as part of the economic recovery plans. Can you explain the link between unpaid care and inequality, and how investment in care could actually be a driver for sustainable and equitable economic growth, and the steps needed to realize this?
The bottom line is we all care. We care deeply for our loved ones, for our children, for our aging parents. But who does the burden fall to of taking care of the young and the old? It is women. And it's the thing that we don't often talk about. It's both the loving care we want to do, but the many, many, many tasks. If we don't fix our care economy and the care burden that women have, they will never be able to have their full place in society. They won't be able to sit at the decision-making table. They won't be able to have the job they want. And it's not just in the formal sector. Informal sector, too. Women will tell you, I don't have anybody to leave my child with. How can I go run my market or my stand? So this is an issue for low-income, middle-income, and high-income countries. And it's time we did something about it.
Agnes, we know that investing in women works. What will it take for women farmers, entrepreneurs, innovators to go to scale? And what kind of impact could they have on food security and food systems?
So what it will take is nothing that we haven't had before. They need a voice. Women already know what they want to do, and they're already practicing the things that can go to scale. But they are not in places where they can express themselves. The knowledge they have stays with them because it's not being tapped into. So let's give them voice, and let's allow ourselves to learn from what they are doing. Number two, they need to be seen. Women in different places of the world have different needs. So my mother's needs are extremely different from even the next village person's needs. So let's really focus on being able to draw out who these people are and be able to tap into their potential where they are. The last one is they need choices. And this cannot be more important than in the agriculture sector, where the type of seed you grow is extremely important to the type of money you get, where the type of business you're able to run and the ability to attract financing is extremely important to how you run your business, or even the knowledge you have is extremely important to how you show up in business, or even the ability to have land is important to how you can go to the bank and get a loan. So I think if we did those three things and really ensured that we scale them across different societies and communities, women can lead. Women are able to lead. Women are leaders. Someone told me the other day that if you want something said, tell it to a man. If you want something done, tell it to a woman.
So 2 immediate takeaways. Women need power and they need choices. To close, let me invite each of you to share one word you're feeling about the SDG to-do list. Just one word. Let's go down the panel. Rebecca first, Agnes, and then Melinda.
What we need.
One word for the SDG. When you think about SDGs and the to-do list associated with those SDGs, what's the one word that comes to mind?
Solidarity.
Solidarity, that's one.
Women empowerment. Empowerment, women empowerment.
2 words, but I'll let you pass on that. Empowerment.
Empowerment.
Melinda?
Hopeful.
Hopeful. And on that hopeful note, please join me in thanking these extraordinary women for being part of such an important conversation. Thank you to you all. Your Excellencies, friends, we've come to the end of our dialogue on solutions to end inequalities. We know that it is simply paramount to empower and support women as key drivers for sustainable and equitable economic growth. Now, let me leave you with this. By 2030, more than 150 million women and girls could emerge from poverty if governments implement a comprehensive strategy, including spending more on social protections, investments in the green economy, better infrastructure, and education. We hope that this dialogue has resonated deeply with the work people everywhere are doing to bring about change in their communities, in their countries, and across the globe. And let me end with a quote from Nelson Mandela. Freedom, be that political, economic, or social, cannot be achieved unless the women have been emancipated from all forms of oppression. I've never regarded women as in any way less competent than men.
Your Excellencies, friends, our next guest is an inspiring young woman who has moved many of us with her poems of hope, change, unity, and resilience. Please welcome poet, activist, and UNICEF supporter, Amanda Gorman.
UN Secretary General, distinguished guests, and all of humankind. How can I ask you to do good when we've barely withstood our greatest threats yet? The depths of death, despair, and disparity, atrocities across cities, towns, and countries, lives lost, climactic costs, exhausted, angered. We are endangered, not because of our numbers, but because of our numbness. We're strangers to one another's perils and pain, unaware that the welfare of the public and the planet share a name. Equality doesn't mean being the exact same, but enacting a vast aim, the good of the world to its highest capability. The wise believe that our people without power leaves our planet without possibility. Therefore, though poverty is a poor existence, complicity is a poorer excuse. We must go the distance, though this battle is hard and huge, though this fight we did not choose, for preserving the earth isn't a battle too big to win, but a blessing too large to lose. This is the most pressing truth, that our people have only one planet to call home, and our planet has only one people to call its own. We can either divide and be conquered by the few, or we can decide to conquer the future and say that today a new dawn rewrote. Say that as long as we have humanity, we will forever have hope. Together, we won't just be the generation that tries, but the generation that triumphs. Let us see a legacy where tomorrow is not driven by the human condition, but by our human conviction. And while hope alone can't save us now, with it, we can brave the now, because our hardest change hinges on our darkest challenges. Thus, may our crisis be our cry, our crossroad, the oldest ode we owe each other. We chime it for the climate, for our communities. We shall respect and protect every part of this planet, hand it to every heart on this earth until no one's worth is rendered by the race, gender, class, or identity they were born. This morn, let it be sworn that we are one human kin, grounded not just by the griefs we bear, but by the good we begin. To anyone out there, I only ask that you care before it's too late, that you live aware and awake, that you lead with love in hours of hate. I challenge you to heed this call. I dare you to shape our fate. Above all, I dare you to do good so that the world might be great. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, friends, a message from the Secretary General's SDG advocates, Black Pink.
Hi, this is Blackpink. This is the United Nations SDG moment. We're here today to bring you special attention to the Sustainable Development Goals.
We can't deny that the climate crisis is getting worse. There isn't a single moment to lose. That is why SDG 13 for climate action is so important. It can truly make or break our efforts across all global goals.
We must seize this moment and take actions to create a world that is more sustainable and leave no one behind. So what can we do?
첫째, 개인의 노력이 빚어낼 수 있는 효과를 과소평가하지 말아야 합니다. 우리는 탄소 발자국을 줄이고 에너지 소비를 줄이기 위해 지금보다 훨씬 더 많은 조치를 취할 수 있습니다. 예를 들어 식습관 같은 사소한 삶의 영역에서도 차이를 만들어낼 수 있는데 지역 농산물을 선택하고 음식물 쓰레기를 최소화하는 등의 작은 노력이 큰 변화를 만듭니다.
둘째, 소비 습관. 우리는 우리 생각보다 훨씬 더 큰 영향력을 가지고 있습니다. 소비를 통해 사회에 메시지를 던지고 원하는 것을 요구할 수 있으니까요. 현명한 소비를 위해 우리 함께 지속 가능한 상품들을 찾아볼까요? 그리고 무엇보다 기후변화에 대해 꾸준히 공부를 해야 합니다.
미래를 보호해야 할 책임이 우리 모두에게 있으니 배움과 지식을 통해 함께 더 나은 내일을 만들면 좋겠습니다.
All of us deserve a world abundant of nature, energy, and livelihood.
저희 블랙핑크는 이제 배우고 행동하는 여정을 시작했습니다. 저희와 계속 함께 해주시겠어요?
지금은 UN SDG moment입니다.
Let's take a moment to learn about our planet and what we can do to make it better.
Not enough time to miss me. Excellencies and friends, the Secretary General spoke about the various perils pushing the SDGs out of reach. Among them, the climate crisis presents possibly the greatest threat. Right now, climate impacts are taking a growing toll on people, prosperity, and our planet. The outlook ahead is precarious. As we learned from the Uniting in Science report, we are headed in the wrong direction on many key climate indicators. At the same time, we have vast opportunities ahead if we double down on climate action to supercharge progress right across the SDGs. To discuss the state of play on Goal 13, climate action, and the various pathways ahead, I'm joined by Simon Steele, the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and boy, do we need more steel in the game. Chido Mpemba, the Youth Envoy for the African Union, and Ingrid Ruimert, Senior Vice President at renewables company Ørsted. The Secretary General has said that grotesque greed is a key factor fueling the climate crisis, even as we see devastating losses from floods, fire, and drought. People and the climate can't seem to catch a break. Simon, you've taken up a role at what really is an inflection point, right? In this climate emergency, clear climate impacts are rapidly worsening, and yet there's growing evidence that climate action, particularly from governments, has stalled. We are 51 days away from COP27, a vital moment from the world. What does it need to deliver?
Thank you, Sharon. Two things, progress and direction. With only 8 COPs to go in this decisive decade of action, think about it. 8 COPs, that is the equivalent of 2 World Cup finals. That's 2 Olympic finals to go. So every COP is absolutely critical. And we know that progress will be made in each of those, but the question is, will it be sufficient progress? So every COP is a crucial COP. And the science is clear. If we continue doing what we're doing, we're going to fall off a cliff edge. The evidence is clear. You know, in every region, every country, we're seeing the impacts of climate change. Pakistan, the Sahel, across Europe, the US, the Pacific, the Caribbean. whether that's sea level rise, hurricanes, flood, fire. You know, that list goes on. So we're at this inflection point, this tipping point. So we know what needs to be done. We know we need to limit or cut emissions by half within this 8-year period. But the good news is that we've entered a new era in the climate discussions. The Paris Agreement is more or less negotiated. So this new era is shifting from negotiations to implementation. And what does that mean? It means getting stuff done. It's moving from how should we do it to this is how to do it and getting those things done, whether that's at a country level, whether that's companies, whether that's in our homes, every person. And we know the 4 negotiating tracks, the work tracks, whether that's mitigation, adaptation, finance, loss and damage. But we also need direction. And what COP27 has to demonstrate is recognizing the urgency of what needs to be done and the scale of the response that is required. Because this is impacting real people. Yeah. So there can be no backsliding as we leave that COP.
And as we spare a thought for Pakistan, let's also think about Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic right now, because Hurricane Fiona is barreling through those islands as we speak here. We have all witnessed young people on streets and online demanding credible and urgent climate actions from world leaders. Chido, you've spent the last 7 months traveling the African continent, meeting young Africans to help mobilize climate action. Can you tell us what you're hearing from young people about the solutions that they want to see now?
Thank you. I think what is standing out is that climate change is happening right now, and it's something that is very urgent, which is why we have a lot of young people in the forefront in this regard. I mean, when we consider that 7 out of 10 countries most vulnerable to climate change are in Africa, we realize that this mostly affects the young people as the largest demographic and the most vulnerable, who suffer from consequences of droughts, floods, and other extreme climate events. And some of the solutions that have been coming, this is based on sitting with young women, sitting with a group of youth refugees that have also been affected through, issues of climate mobility. And they're saying that we need youth as a main stakeholder. We need to bring them to the table in the decision-making spaces, and also in local community action, national strategies, as well as global platforms. For youth and children that account for 40% of the global population, it means that we need to recognize that they're half of the number that we need on most of these platforms in order to provide the solutions for now and for tomorrow. In addition to this, we must have half of the emissions by 2030. We need to do it now. We do not have 8 years to act, but the action needs to actually start now. We need to act, and we need to start building resilience from now, but ensuring that we also incorporate the young people who make up the largest demographic in Africa.
And let's not forget it's an African COP this year, right, in Egypt. Ingrid, your work is focused on transforming not only how businesses operate, but also the entire energy system and the way in which it benefits all of society. We need a green, renewable revolution. Are you seeing one? What's holding back a faster transition?
Yeah, thank you, Sherwin. If you had asked me just a year ago, I would have said, no, I don't see a renewable revolution. But luckily, lately, political leaders have stepped up. The thing is, it's just not happening fast enough. My company at Ørsted, we developed the first offshore wind farm already 30 years ago. And 2 weeks ago, we commissioned the world's largest wind farm in the UK. So we have proven again and again over the last 3 decades that we can deliver clean, affordable energy on budget, on time, and it also with a positive impact on nature and on people. Because renewable energy actually delivers on most, if not all, the 17 SDGs. Clean and affordable energy for all, health and well-being through better air quality, life underwater, life on land. It spurs new industries, innovation, creates jobs, creates new skills, education, and I could go on. So the question is, of course, how do we then get the revolution going? And I would mention two things here today. First of all, we need to significantly speed up the build-out of renewables. Not in the next decade or next year, we have to start today. Governments need to speed up the allocation of land and of seabed. We need to speed up the permitting processes, which often take much longer than to build the actual wind farms. And we need to give developing economies capacity building, technology, and finance. And then secondly, we need to build it right. We should have our youth, our people, and our communities at the very heart of this revolution. Ensure that we create jobs, new skills, and we work with local supply chains. And we need to have a net positive approach to biodiversity. And only then, I think, the renewable revolution will sweep the world, and we will be able to create a world that runs entirely on green energy.
Yeah, and I think, the broader point there is that coal cannot achieve the SDGs anymore, right? Coal cannot do it. But the big question is this principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, the responsibilities that developed countries have to developing countries that are still so very reliant on coal for energy. Simon, there seems to be broad agreement that the climate crisis is a code red for humanity and that urgent and bold action is needed. Simon, in your career, you've worn many hats in government as well as the private sector, giving you a very unique perspective. What do you see as the key opportunities to drive progress for climate and all the SDGs?
Well, thank you, Sharon. Stronger climate action will drive progress across virtually all of the SDGs. But starting with the negative, climate change is a threat multiplier, and it negatively impacts our performance in those SDGs. Whether it's destabilizing the global economy, whether it is lost productivity, $2 trillion estimated as loss due to a warming planet by 2030, loss of jobs, more people in poverty. It creates a conflict for our resources, the impact on migrations, estimated that by 2030, 200 million people will be displaced due to climate change. But climate change also presents us with an opportunity if we take the right steps, and will be an enabler, can be an enabler in terms of that positive action in terms of achieving the SDGs. Positive action in this area is a single greatest opportunity for us to build a safer, healthier, more resilient, more prosperous world. And this is not just for the present generation, it's for generations to come. So how do we achieve it? And it has to be for countries, companies, households, people, doing what we know needs to be done in terms of tackling this crisis. And if we get it right, things look bleak right now, but if we get it right, it's our best opportunity at achieving the SDGs.
Chida, what does resilience and adaptation mean to you and your peers? Why is it important, including dividends across other SDGs from investments in resilience and adaptation?
Okay. I think resilience is about protecting people and livelihoods from worsening climate impact and disasters. I mean, for young people, particularly in developing countries, it's about having a realistic chance to realize their full potential without declimated by climate impacts. Adaptation and resilience, for example, is also entailing us having to strengthen the anticipatory actions and increasing investments which are human-centered. We need to put the young people at the center too. I mean, many people rely on agriculture, for example, for their livelihoods, and this sector relies on predictable weather patterns. And Africa is expected to feed 2.2 billion people, including 1 billion youth, by 2050. And this means that we need to increase those investments to ensure that we are adequate when it comes to food production for now and for the future.
Ingrid, the final question goes to you. We know that the private sector has an oversized role to play in preventing climate change and is in many ways moving faster than governments are. Ingrid, last week we saw the founder of Patagonia give away his entire $3 billion company to groups and entities that are fighting climate change. Is this the tip of the proverbial melting iceberg? How do we speed up climate action and accountability and encourage more billionaires to give away their money to us?
Yes, surely the action from Patagonia, I think, is one of the strongest expressions of walk the talk that I have seen so far. Because let's be honest, it took all too long for the private sector to get to the table. And our youth had to take the streets and ask for climate action to wake us all up. But now, of course, a large part of the private sector is at the table, which is good because we can develop new technologies, accelerate, scale, create jobs, educate, in short, be this catalyst for change. And I do see many signs of credible climate action and companies coming together, working across industries, such as the Steel Zero initiative, to take an example. But three things need to happen. First of all, companies have to set targets and they have to be validated. And I would encourage all major companies to work with the Science Based Targets initiative. Last year, my company, Ørsted, was the first energy company to have approved a net zero target long term. And it's not only the direct emissions that count, it is the entire supply chain, upstream and downstream. And that's why it's important to extend the target to the entire supply chain, like we have done with a 100% renewable electricity target. Because accountability is crucial. We need to push for targets, standards, and reporting. And secondly, we need to act, because long-term targets mean nothing without immediate action. And luckily, we experience a huge appetite for clean energy from some of the largest companies in this world. And of course, government should work with the private sector and ask companies to document, deliver, and disclose. And then finally, sustainability needs to be at the core of every CEO's agenda, to do well by doing good. And concepts like Scope 1, 2, and 3 should be household language in every boardroom. And in the end, climate action is not only about technology, it's really about leadership.
So very quickly to close, each of you need to give me one word that comes to mind when you think of the SDG to-do list. Simon, we'll start with you.
Momentum.
Momentum. Cheeto.
Youthful.
Youthful. Ingrid.
Energized.
Momentum, youthful, energized. Why don't you get energized and thank our panel for their contributions today. Thank you all. A daunting set of challenges, as we heard today, but also an incredible opportunity ahead to supercharge progress across the SDGs and bring them closer to within reach. If we choose much bolder climate action, and boy, don't we need that, in buckets. Thank you sincerely to our panelists, much food for thought, and much fodder for action.
Your Excellencies, friends, I hope you've been as inspired as I have listening to people who are driving true change in their countries, in their communities, and across the world. As Her Excellency PM Motley so rightly just said, we ask you, the children of the world, to hold our feet to the fire. You heard it here. People everywhere are leading by example. Leaders making bold policy choices, young climate activists raising their voices, entrepreneurs scaling solutions, and humanitarians working tirelessly every single day to help people in need. Now, while there are so many challenges facing us around the world, there's also so much inspiration and hope. As you just heard young activist Amanda Gorman just say, I dare you to do good so that the world might be great. What needs to happen has been vividly illustrated. We have the commitments, the resources, the tools, and the plan to change all that is destructive, disrespectful, and dangerous. What we need now is ambition and action to turn those commitments into a reality. Today, we remind the world of its historic responsibility and promise to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, the world's to-do list. We've been inspired by the breathtaking projections created by Expo 2020 that you have been surrounded by. Now, in front of you, you will see an SDG board as well, and I implore that you take this back with you and let it serve as a daily reminder of the important commitment that we have made. When we leave this room, we must leave determined to work every single day to advance the goals so that we can return in a year's time a lot more closer to achieving them. Now we should take inspiration from singer-songwriter Judith Hill, who will be performing Bob Dylan's legendary song, Blowing in the Wind, to a short new film made for today. But before I pass it on to Judith, I would like to say, as you listen and as we watch, we need to resolve together to get the world's to-do list done. Thank you so much.
Must a man walk down before you can call him a man? How many seas does a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? And how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many years must the mountain exist before it is washed in the seas? How many years can some people exist before they were allowed to be free? And how many times does a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? Oh, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Can a man look up before he can see the sky? And how many ears can one man have before he can hear the people cry? And how many days does it take till he knows that too many people have died? Oh, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind.
Your Excellencies, friends, a message from the Prime Minister of Canada and co-chair of the Secretary General's SDG Advocates, His Excellency Justin Trudeau.
Hello everyone, bonjour à tous. It's great to be here with leaders in government, civil society, and the private sector, alongside my SDG Advocates Group co-chair, Prime Minister Motley. Mia, look forward to seeing you in a few days. This SDG moment and Richard Curtis's exhibition reminds us that our SDG goals aren't just a blueprint or a to-do list. They're an urgent call for action. 2030 isn't far away, and we need urgent collective action to move forward on our shared commitments. Comme vous le savez,
as you are aware, we have seen delays with respect to the many significant challenges which are of concern to us. For example, we consider the efforts to reduce poverty throughout the world.
Declining poverty rates. There are as many people living in poverty today as there were in 2015 when the 2030 Agenda was adopted. The truth is that everything from COVID to climate change to international conflict makes the solutions we need more complex and interconnected than ever. But that isn't a reason to lessen our ambition. It's a reason to accelerate our efforts towards reaching our sustainable development goals.
For this reason, Canada has invested $827 million in the agricultural and agricultural systems, and more specifically to facilitate climate action as well as resilience. This is also why in March we held a summit led by young people, during which we learned more about young displaced persons and sought to find solutions to promote their education. We've invested more than $5 billion to reduce pollution and to shore up climate resilience throughout the world. And we intend, in view of holding COP15 in December, to advance the question of biodiversity. Canada wishes to surmount these challenges and many others.
Long, and it might seem daunting, but by working together, I'm confident we'll make it shorter. So thank you for your partnership and your leadership.
I look forward to working with all of you over the months and years to come. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to an end of the SDG moment. This was a reality check, but also a call to action to deliver the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we have the opportunity to do that right now as we commence the Transforming Education Summit. As Ms. Melinda Gates just said so eloquently, women don't need empowerment, they need power. Fighting for the rights of freedom of children, young people, especially girls, and ensuring their access to transformative power of education are at the heart of my work as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. I grew up in India, where access to education is a challenge for a lot of girls, as it is in many other parts of the world, where children desperately want to learn, but are challenged to do so. I strongly believe that education is the cornerstone of equality, social justice, social change, and democracy. It is the foundation that so many of the Sustainable Development Goals are built on. As Nelson Mandela once very famously said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. It is time to transform the world. Thank you and good afternoon.
Nice segue into the education.
Your Excellencies, friends, we have concluded the SDG moment. Please welcome the host of the Transforming Education Summit, VIDEOPORTAL.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the official opening ceremony of the Transforming Education Summit Leaders' Day. My name is Folie Batibo, and it's a great pleasure to be your Master of Ceremonies this morning. 1 year ago, in his report on our common agenda, the UN Secretary General announced his intention to convene a Transforming Education Summit. He did so in response to what he called a global crisis in education, one of access, quality, and relevance. Now, over the past year, people across over 150 countries have been working to generate new ideas and renewed urgency to end this crisis and to reimagine our education systems to be fit for the 21st century. Over the weekend, thousands of people descended onto the United Nations to mobilize for change, and today, world leaders have gathered to put forward their commitments to ensure that education is accessible to every single person in the world and empowers them to help shape a more peaceful, just, and sustainable future. So thank you for being here, and welcome to you all. Now, the global crisis in education affects us all, of course, but right now it is affecting one group more than any other: children and young people. So to begin today's proceedings, here is a snapshot of their concerns, their ideas, and their demands. Take a look.
Dolazim iz Bosne i Hercegovine.
I'm from India.
I am from Nigeria.
I'm from Turkey. I'm from the United States.
I'm from Puerto Rico.
I want world leaders attending Transforming Education Summit to revive and rejuvenate the education system in their country. You're not doing enough. You should do more.
I am disappointed that more than 260 million children are out of school all over the world.
Inequality is one of the foremost challenges to reaching education everywhere.
Children are not given enough food at school.
Climate education is still not a topic well addressed in curriculums.
Refugees are still suffering from the low-quality learning or no learning at all.
We need to rethink and reformulate new approaches to teaching, learning, and evaluating.
I urge world governments to invest more in professional teachers training.
I want digital education, emotional intelligence, and 21st century skills to be part of our curriculum.
Educators need to be trained in strategies that will ensure students with disabilities are included within the classroom.
The educational system needs to place more emphasis on early intervention.
A proper education, the needed safety within the school, as well as preservation of their mental health is a must.
To me, education is the foundation for a self-determined life, especially for young girls and women all over the world.
Dear world leaders, if there is something or a favor we would ask for, we the people from the countries where education means all, please implement the policies you're trying to make during this summit.
Education empowers us to dream. It empowers us to realize those dreams. It gives us the will and power to grow together, because when we grow together, nothing is impossible.
Education is our fundamental right.
Education is my right.
A educação, direito fundamental para todos.
Please, let me learn.
Let me learn. Let me learn.
Let me learn.
A simple but powerful message that you heard there. Let them learn. Let them learn. Now, we have a very busy program ahead of us today that will include a number of leaders' roundtables and thematic sessions throughout the day, focusing on cross-cultural priorities, cross-cutting, rather, priorities for transforming education. We now turn to a number of high-level dignitaries who will share with us their perspectives on why and how we must transform education. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to introduce first the person who has brought us all together here today to mark this a true turning point for education. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations.
Excellencies, dear young people, teachers, parents, and partners. Throughout my life, education has been my guide and touchstone. I regard myself as a lifelong student, and I've drawn great inspiration from my work as a teacher many decades ago. Without education, where would I be? What and where would any of us be? Every single person in this room knows education transforms lives, economies, and societies. But we also know we must transform education, because education is in a deep crisis. Instead of being the great enabler, education is fast becoming a great divider. Some 70% of 10-year-olds in poorer countries are unable to read a basic text. Either they are out of school or in school but barely learning. Even in developed countries, education systems often entrench rather than reduce inequality, reproducing it across generations. The rich have access to the best resources, schools and universities, leading to the best jobs, while the poor, especially girls, face huge obstacles to getting the qualifications that could change their lives. Displaced people and students with disabilities face the highest obstacles of all. The COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on learning worldwide and dealt a hammer blow to progress on SDG 4. But the education crisis began long before and runs much deeper. The report card from the International Commission on the Future of Education put it clearly. Education systems don't make the grade. They are failing students and societies and favoring rote learning and competition for grades. Too often, curricula are outdated and narrow. Education systems take little account of lifelong learning, and teachers are undertrained, undervalued, and underpaid. The digital divide penalizes poor students, and the education financing gap yawns wider than ever. We will not end this crisis by simply doing more of the same, faster or better. Now is the time to transform education systems. So, dear world leaders, your people, the world's young people and future generations are calling on you to act with vision and purpose. A new vision for education in the 21st century is taking shape. Above all, quality education must support the development of individual learners throughout his or her life. And it must help people learn how to learn with a focus on problem solving and collaboration. It must provide the foundations for learning from reading, writing, and mathematics to scientific, digital, social, and emotional skills. It must also develop students' capacity to adapt to the rapidly changing world of work. And it must be accessible to all from the earliest stages and throughout their lives. And it must help us learn to live and work together and to understand ourselves and our responsibilities to each other and to our planet. At a time of rampant misinformation, climate denial, and attacks on human rights, we need education systems that distinguish fact from conspiracy, instill respect for science, and celebrate humanity in all its diversity. Excellencies, to move from this vision to reality, allow me to highlight 5 areas for our attention and commitment. First, we must protect the right to quality education for everyone, especially girls, everywhere. School must be open to all, without discrimination. We must recover the years of education lost around the world because of the pandemic. Quality education for all means tackling the crisis in foundational learning and ensuring it is lifelong, and placing a greater focus on education in crisis hotspots. From this platform, I appeal to the authorities in Afghanistan: lift all restrictions on girls' access to secondary education immediately. Girls' education is among the most important steps to deliver peace, security, and sustainable development everywhere. Second, teachers are the lifeblood of education systems. We need a new focus on their roles and skill sets. Today's teachers need to be facilitators in the classroom, promoting learning rather than merely transmitting answers. We also need to tackle the global shortage of teachers and look at increasing their quality by raising their status and ensuring they have decent working conditions and continuous training and learning opportunities and receive the adequate salaries. Third, school must become safe, healthy space with no place for violence, stigma, or intimidation. Education systems should promote the physical and mental health of all students, including their sexual and reproductive health.
Excellencies, fourth, the digital revolution must be of benefit to all school children. I ask states to ensure that students and teaching establishments be better connected. In this regard, our GIGA initiative aims at putting all schools online. But connectivity in itself will not be enough to provide an education. I encourage governments and teachers to work with partners in the private sector to develop digital educational content of a high quality for everyone. Fifth, the question of financing. None of this will be possible without an increase in funding for education and without a surge in global solidarity against inequality. In these difficult times, I call upon all countries to protect the budgets for education and to ensure that their expenditure in this area is translated into a progressive increase in resources per student and by better academic results. Educational funding must be the #1 priority of governments. It is the best investment that a country can make in its population and in its future. And the international community has a crucial role to play. I would ask our development partners to cancel the reductions in aid and to devote at least 15% of public development aid to education. The international financial institutions must provide resources to developing countries and allow them budgetary flexibility so that they are able to invest. Their disbursements and their advice must correspond to the goal of ensuring quality education for everyone, girls and boys. I also invite the international financial institutions to benefit from the International Finance Facility for Education. This tool aims to mobilize $10 billion to help around 700 million children living in lower middle-income countries to receive a quality education. Dear friends, the Transforming Education Summit can only achieve its global goals by creating a global movement. Governments, young people, civil society, teachers, corporate leaders, and donors are becoming mobilized. The United Nations is pooling all its strengths thanks to the action of UNESCO, UNICEF, and United Nations teams present on the ground. Let us move forward together so that everyone can learn, can blossom, and dream throughout their lives. Let us ensure that the students of today and future generations will be able to access the education that they need in order to create a more sustainable and more inclusive, just and peaceful world for everyone, for girls and boys. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général.
Thank you very much, Secretary General.
Thank you, Secretary General, for your powerful message. Another round of applause, please, for the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. It is now my pleasure to invite the President of the UN's Economic and Social Council and the Permanent Representative of Bulgaria to the United Nations, Her Excellency, Ms. Lachezera Stoeva, to give her remarks.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address the Transforming Education Summit. I commend the Secretary General for proposing this summit in his groundbreaking report entitled Our Common Agenda and for convening us here today. Education is in crisis globally, yet another crisis, one might think, and they could not be more wrong. The fact that 2/3 of the 10-year-olds around the world cannot read and understand a simple story should not only alarm us, it should terrify us and propel us to take action. The crisis in education we are facing is one of equity, inclusion, and quality. Millions of children, and especially girls and young women, could be shut out of a key path towards a brighter future. This is not only unjust, it is also an enormous loss of human potential, innovation, and creativity. Excellencies, transforming education and thereby unleashing human potential is key to all progress, and it needs to happen now. If we are to fulfill the vision of Agenda 2030, we must realize that SDG 4 on ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all is actually not a goal. It is the means to achieving the rest of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Success in delivering SDG 4 will unlock progress in achieving other goals, including reducing inequalities, spurring climate action, and empowering people towards the job and the future. Education goes beyond skill acquisition. It is a foundation for peaceful societies and effective institutions. We must keep the focus on the most vulnerable who risk to be left behind. The model should be shifted. To paraphrase Mr. Gordon Brown, instead of developing just some of the potential of some of the young people, education should develop all of the potential of all of the young people. Excellencies, at the 2022 ECOSOC High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development last July, more than 140 ministers and multiple stakeholders reviewed the situations on the SDGs with a special focus on SDG 4. Let me highlight a few key policy messages from the Ministerial Declaration of the HLPF addressed to this summit. First, the right to education is a human right. It promotes the realization of other human rights and the achievement of sustainable development. Second, investing in inclusive and equitable quality education requires sustainable funding. Third, governments are encouraged to invest in resilient, inclusive, and shock-responsive public education and to increase or maintain the share of public expenditure on education. Fourth, additional measures are urgently needed to mitigate the effects of school closures and cuts in national education budgets, including on learning, child nutrition, and all forms of violence. Fifth, we must hold firm on our commitment to ensure free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education for all girls and boys. Sixth, governments are encouraged to adopt education and lifelong learning strategies, policies, and budgets that ensure gender equality in and through education. Seventh, the teaching profession has a key role to improve quality of education and learning at all levels of education. Eighth, it is critical to promote digital technologies, including access to broadband internet and technology devices, connectivity, digital inclusion and literacy, and incorporate digital competences into the educational system. And finally, the declaration calls upon member states in collaboration with other key education stakeholders, in particular youth and civil society, to work towards the transformation of education systems to achieve SDG 4 and better prepare our societies for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, today we encounter a new education landscape. This Transforming Education Summit is just the beginning. It is up to all of us to ensure that commitments are translated into actions and policies to fulfill the vision of Agenda 2030 and SDG 4. Without quality education for all, there is no future, or at least there is no bright one. So let them learn. Thank you.
Let them learn. That's our message for today. Thank you so much, Madam President, for your contributions. Now, in the lead up to today's important gathering, a pre-summit on how to transform education was held in June earlier this year at UNESCO headquarters in Paris. To tell us more about UNESCO's work in reimagining education, please welcome its Director General, Madame Audrey Azoulay. Bienvenue à la Directrice Générale de l'UNESCO.
Welcome to the Director General of UNESCO, Madame Audrey Azoulay.
Monsieur le
Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, dear representatives of youth, students, educational communities, dear friends. It is a particularly symbolic moment to find ourselves here at the United Nations, despite the disasters happening in the world, here as we are to defend the universal right to education. I'm proud to see amongst us many representatives of the educational community, and we need to hear their voice, we need their experience. And I'm also so happy to see so many young people here being given such prominence at this summit. Thanks to your participation, all your participation, this global common good, which is education, is finally being accorded the position which it deserves. Namely, it is being placed at the top of the international agenda, and I would like to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations. We should recognize the extraordinary power of education, but power which is nevertheless often underappreciated and underfinanced. Education which, whenever we have placed our faith in it, in teachers, in schools, has changed the lives of individuals, of nations, and of entire generations. There can be no economic development and no peace without education. And it is at the heart of the mandate of UNESCO for 75 years, since our first major literacy campaigns in the south of Italy and in South Korea. Our organization has relentlessly accompanied its member states to ensure that this fundamental right is effective and genuine. Whereas 400 million children were deprived of schools in the year 2000, 20 years later, that figure has decreased by 40%. There is progress, therefore, but it is still not enough, because a 40% reduction still means 244 million children that will not be going to school this year. And, of course, here I would like to take up the appeal just now issued by the Secretary General, and that is of the United Nations, and our call for Afghan girls, all of them, of all ages, be able to go back to school. It is their right. But another aspect of this educational crisis is the fact that a lot of children that are in school, even though there are more of them, are not learning properly. And this situation has been worsened since the educational disaster that was the COVID-19 pandemic. The figures that we published last July, together with UNICEF and the World Bank, show that although 57% of children of 10 years could not understand a simple written text before the pandemic, that figure has now gone up to 70%, and in sub-Saharan Africa, it's 89%. It is urgent, therefore, that collectively we reverse this trend. With regard to its content, education cannot either be rigid or inadequate for the needs of the 21st century. What is at stake in this transformation of education is fundamentally linked to the content of learning. Education, if it is to be relevant, must be adapted to our world, to our century, in order to train the citizens of today, but above all, the citizens of tomorrow. This has been UNESCO's guiding thought since 2018. We took this up in 2018 together with you all, and we've put this into our report on the future of education, drawn up under the leadership of Madam Sahle-Work Zewde, the President of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, and I thank her for this work. This is the document, as you know, which is a reference document for this summit, the future of education. It calls upon us to place education at the heart of our plans for society, at the heart of the social contract that we are to forge. It calls upon us to overcome the risk of stagnation by placing education at the heart of this new social contract, adapted to the great challenges of our time. And I'd like to quote here three of them. Our report as a living reality on the planet, the digital transformation, and finally peace. Three central topics for an education in our times and also for tomorrow.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the first of these themes, our relationship with nature and the need to find new responses to address climate disruption. For this, education has a key role to play. Yet, less than half of all countries truly address environmental issues in their school curricula. Our commitment at UNESCO is to support our member states so that all are able to give climate education a central place by 2025. This means for us accompanying our member states through this transition, because it's also a transition in education, by offering concrete assistance to transform school curricula, to train teachers, to make educational institutions models for the rest of society to follow. Second, the challenge of the digital era. Because right now, this major technological and anthropological turning point is neither regulated nor controlled. But the digital world is not an obvious world. It's not that intuitive. We must therefore make it truly accessible to all ages through open educational resources, so digital gaps do not widen inequalities between generations and between countries. We must also teach users to master this digital world and to approach it with a critical mind, which is what we've been missing in the recent years. UNESCO is committed to this through the development of digital skills and media and information literacy. Third and lastly, and this is the essence of UNESCO's mandate, education must always foster peace. It must support understanding and respect of diversity, respect of others in diverse and interconnected societies. To this end, our member states in Paris have made an essential decision. They have decided to reshape international doctrine on this subject. And we've started a global conversation to reform UNESCO's recommendation on education for peace and human rights, to guide public policies in response to contemporary challenges, and to do so for the long term. Excellencies, in this interconnected world, education also requires international cooperation, and this is why we are here discussing education at the heart of the UN. Since last year, we have collectively reinforced the institutional framework that guides international cooperation on education, the High-Level Steering Committee on SDG 4, under the auspices of UNESCO in Paris. This committee will make it possible to better coordinate the efforts of education actions, in particular to monitor commitments, including the commitments made at this summit. Commitments that have been prepared through national consultation, supported by UNESCO in over 150 countries. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the President of Sierra Leone, as co-chair of this committee, for his unwavering dedication to this cause. And of course, we will also need more adequate funding, more material, more financial and human resources. Last November, UNESCO convened the Global Education Meeting where our member states adopted the Paris Declaration. In doing so, they committed to setting aside at least 15% of public spending or 4% of GDP for education, compared to 3.6 points today in low-income countries. This engagement is indispensable, as we know that education is not a cost, but the best investment. There is no fairer and more effective investment than education, than investing in teachers, in schools, than training and recruiting teachers, to train them better, to consider them better. And this is also what we all realized during the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to transform education itself if we want to transform the world. The message that was brought here ahead of this summit by the young generation is very clear. We need to transform education so that they can have the future they want. I thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Madame la Directrice Générale.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Director General, to remind us that we have to act urgently to change course.
Of UNESCO mentioned, late last year, the International Commission on the Futures of Education released a report urging us to reimagine education to equip learners with all they need to thrive in today's world. Well, to find out more about the recommendations of the report, let's now hear from the President of Ethiopia and Chair of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, Her Excellency Ms. Sahle-Work Zewde, who is sharing her remarks via video message.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Madam President of HAYLI.AM, Madam Director General of UNESCO, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Secretary General, I wish to thank you for having extended invitation for me to take the floor during this important summit in my capacity as the chair of the International Commission on the Future of Education. This is a clear message of recognition of the work done by the eminent members of the Commission. For this, I thank you. 3 years ago, when the Initiative on the Future of Education was launched, I declared that we can no longer tolerate the future of the planet being dictated by those who are fewest in number, and there are pressing challenges of our era. They require mobilization of knowledge, culture, and collective experience. The future should be shaped in a democratic way at the global and local levels with respect for human rights. Education is a collective responsibility, a collective project for the future. Let us never forget this. We can transform education only together. As a woman from the African continent, where the population is the youngest, I profoundly believe that knowledge and education can literally shape the future in a single generation. Yes, I said in one generation. This should be our ambition. Our current educational approaches, educational models cannot meet these aspirations. It is our duty to transform education, both to correct past exclusions and to shape a more sustainable future. For this reason, we need to release the transformative potential of education. This is the thrust of our report, Rethinking Future Together, a new social contract for education. A new social contract for education.
It's a strong transformation on our way of thinking and acting in education. First, we need to think of education as a common good and a global responsibility. We can only fight COVID pandemic if everyone is protected. We can only fight the pandemic of inequalities if everyone is educated. We have a deep obligation to fully involve the whole society in decisions about the futures of education, and above all, the youth. It is through education that we reach across generations. Education is everyone's responsibility, not just school systems. That is why we need a new social contract. Second, we need to protect schools as unique and irreplaceable institutions, but at the same time, we must transform them, change their form. We need more open and diverse educational environments, new educational ecosystems that favor cooperation, curricula based on the knowledge commons, and a more collaborative teaching profession. Changing the form of the school implies changing pedagogy, the work of students and teachers, the relationships with knowledge and learning, with cities and societies. Let us be clear, we are facing the greatest transformation in the history of education. Third, we need to radically change the decision-making process in education. Nothing will be transformed from top to bottom. We need to change our approach. We need to value the work, initiatives, and experiences of teachers and schools and communities that around the world are shaping the futures of education. We need a strong, collaborative, socially valued teaching profession that is well educated and properly supported. The great work ahead of us implies this change of method, this change of perspective, so that different and more sustainable futures of education can flourish. For these transformations, we need the engagement of universities, a greater emphasis on innovation and research, as well as a global international cooperation based on the principle of solidarity and mutual learning. We need to stress education as a public and common good. We need to value inclusion and diversity. We need a new way of living with the planet, a new humanism which is more than human. We need to understand that education is always a relation between humans for the elevation of our common humanity. I am acutely aware of the many challenges that we all face, but there is no more pressing concern than the transformation of education at this particular juncture. If we are to rise to our responsibility with history, we must lead in creating a new social contract for education, one that duly allows us to reimagine the future together. I hope that our report will continue to serve for this collective ambition. That is why the report is mainly an invitation to dialogue and action. We need to make education help us all to be better prepared for the future rather than to be a tool for reacting to what the future brings. I thank you very much.
Our thanks to the President of Ethiopia for setting out why we need a new social contract for education. And now let's hear from the leader responsible for mobilizing action to make that social contract a reality. Please welcome the President of Sierra Leone and co-chair of the High-Level Steering Committee of Sustainable Development Goal 4, His Excellency Julius Maada Bio.
Mr. Secretary General, President of ECOSOC, Director General of UNESCO, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, youth advocates. This summit demonstrates our shared and very timely commitment to urgently address what has been aptly referred to as the learning crisis. In Sierra Leone, where I come from, we have been aggressively transforming our education sector since 2018. We have done so in order to address questions around inclusion, quality, retention, completion, and transition to technical, vocational, and higher education. Improving educational outcomes in a country where there have been very little investment in education and falling standards was clearly a challenge. School infrastructure, curriculum, policies, and governance had to be urgently addressed. Girls, pregnant girls, poorer learners, learners in rural areas, learners with disabilities had unequal access to education that was on offer. Learners had uneven access to foundational learning, food, teaching, and learning materials, wash facilities, trained teachers, and more. More importantly, we did not have enough money to undertake the necessary reforms we had envisioned. But because of strong political will and a commitment of our people, 4 years on, we have increased enrollment across board by more than 1 million additional learners. We have achieved gender parity in enrollment. We have revamped our curricula at all levels to include critical thinking, comprehension, computational thinking, creativity, and civic education. Girls studying STEM subjects can now be educated from primary through university, tuition-free. Pregnant girls can once again go to school, and we are supporting learners with disabilities with specialized teaching and learning materials. More students are sitting and passing exams than ever before in our country's history. These are but a sample of the achievements we are proud to share as a nation. But then the big question is, how did Sierra Leone do it in the COVID period? We focused on goals, investment, and inclusive and innovative strategies. First, we are clear that our goal was to make education our main vehicle for national development. By making basic and senior secondary education free, we sent a message to every Sierra Leonean that they too deserve to be included. Education. After all, education is not a luxury. It is a right. Second, we raised our domestic investment. We raised education's share of the domestic budget to 20%. School fees and exam fees are now a thing of the past in our government-supported schools. We have expanded school feeding and hired thousands of new teachers and increased their salaries even during COVID-19. Third, we innovated in our policies and technology tools, always with a view to improve inclusion and access. We adopted a radical inclusion policy to deliberately support those most at risk of not reaping the benefits of an education. We hosted 14 countries that signed the Freetown Manifesto to make a commitment to gender transformative leadership in and through education. But we are only getting started because I personally believe that SDG 4 is essential to achieving all other SDGs. We stand ready to work with partners to continue to develop this vision and improve education outcomes in Sierra Leone. As part of the summit preparatory process, we mobilized all actors in support of national consultations on the transformation that we want, and in advancing the summit's action tracks. The SDG High-Level Steering Committee, which I co-chair, and the Summit Advisory Committee have been paramount in this regard. Personally, I met with various stakeholders, including school children, in preparation for this summit. This is why today I'm pleased to announce a new level of ambition to make education an even stronger driver of gender equity, inclusion, and sustainable national development. Today, Sierra Leone commits to cut in half the number of out-of-school children of primary school age by 2030 compared to today. We will launch an alliance for educational learning through which we further commit to cutting the rate of learning poverty in half or more by 2030. We commit to preparing our students for the future by making climate education a central component at all levels. Today, Sierra Leone also commits to setting measurable targets for skills training and technical education. We must support all young people to become nation builders. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, through SDG 4 High-Level Steering Committee and other global, regional, and national mechanisms, we must monitor progress towards the commitments made at this summit. We must rally the international community behind the global initiatives being launched later today during the spotlight sessions. And we must ensure the youth are central to the entire process. Let us join forces, assume leadership, and collectively pave the way for a brighter future for our youth. 2030 is not far away. Let's get going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your remarks. And as the President said, let us join forces. Thank you to all of our speakers for their inspiring words. Please join me in a round of applause, another round of applause for our opening speakers. Thank you so much. Earlier, we caught a glimpse of what young people think about education and what they're calling on world leaders to transform exactly. Over the next 15 minutes, we'll delve deeper into that with contributions from an incredible group of young people. Shortly, we'll learn about the demands of young people as captured in the Youth Declaration that has been developed by young people across the world as part of the summit preparation. But first, it's my great pleasure to welcome three brave powerful women to put a spotlight on one of the most unjust aspects of our world today, the exclusion of women and girls from education. Please give a warm welcome to Vanessa Nakate, climate justice activist and UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. Liza Pozivnich is a student at St. George Academy here in New York who recently fled the war in Ukraine. And Somaya Faruqi is an activist and former captain of the Afghan all-girls robotics teams. Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I know a young girl, her first task every morning is to gather water so that her mom can begin to prepare food for the family. With climate change, this girl is forced to walk farther and farther to find the water. Soon it will be impossible for her to complete the long journey and still make it to school. As the climate crisis worsens, young girls are facing increasing workloads looking after their families. They are also facing increased domestic violence and child marriages. All of this is severely limiting the ability of girls to access and complete their education. And as the climate crisis worsens, these horrifying cycles spiral. Around the world, more than 240 million children are shut out of school. And according to UNICEF, 400 million children live in areas at high risk of cyclones, and 820 million children are highly exposed to heat waves. More than 186 million children go to primary schools without any electricity. This not only leaves them without access to basic lighting and digital learning, it also leaves them exposed to climate dangers such as heat waves, with no ability to power vital systems such as air conditioning units. While all children need support in order to access education, the climate crisis disproportionately affects girls. Closing the gender gap in education can help countries better adapt to the climate crisis and decrease the rate and the impacts of climate change. One study found that the death toll due to weather events could be 60% lower by 2050 if 70% of women achieved lower secondary education. Project Drawdown estimates that investing in education and family planning could reduce emissions by over 85 gigatons by 2050. That's about a decade's worth of China's emissions. Today, you are all here to help find solutions that will transform our education systems and make them fit for purpose. Climate action helps girls stay in school, which in turn helps countries tackle the climate crisis. We must make it possible for all children to have access to an education, and we must help them be able to stay in school. Their futures depend upon it, and it turns out so do all ours as well. Thank you so much.
My name is Елизавета Pasivnich. I am a student from Ukraine. I grew up in Lvov with my older sister and parents. My favorite subject is geography. In my school in Ukraine, I had a favorite teacher of this subject. She is a very professional and positive teacher, and it is indeed thanks to this teacher that I fell in love with this subject. I think that education is a very important aspect in the life of every person, because without education, it will be very difficult for a person to find themselves, to realize their purpose in life. And the more educated people there will be, there are fewer wars and problems there will be in our world. Arriving in another country with a different language and a completely different mentality is very difficult. Usually, refugees who flee their country because of war are in a disadvantageous financial situation. This makes learning virtually impossible. All of my friends and relatives are still in Ukraine. They are still there. They are frightened and shocked. However, despite the fact that war is raging in their country, they intend to pursue their studies with the hope of a better future. None of them wishes to leave their native home, their country, and I too wish to return home because it will be far better for me to continue my studies. My message to you as leaders is that you must make education free for all students who leave their country, regardless of the circumstances of the world. Young people are the future. Without education, we will be unable to fully realize our great potential for the benefit of the entire world. Thank you.
My name is Sumaya Farouqi, and I'm an Afghan student. A year ago, I was sitting in a classroom and optimistic about the future. I was a senior, excited to finish the final year of my secondary school. As the captain of Afghan Girls Robotics team, also known the Afghan Dreamers, I spent my days working on robots, learning, and dreaming. While I wasn't in school, I was traveling around the world with my teammates to compete in international robotics competition. In a country where girls make up over 60% of out-of-school students, my teammates and I had beaten many odds. We were inspiring other Afghan girls and boys and making our country proud. But that all changed on September 18, 2021, when Taliban closed the girls' school in Afghanistan. While our cousins and our brothers sat in classrooms, me and millions of Afghan girls were forced to put our dreams on hold. Today, girls' secondary schools remain closed. Without education, my cousins, my friends, and millions of Afghan girls fear an uncertain future and feel abandoned. The Taliban is slowly erasing our existence in the society. Thousands of girls may never return back to school. Many have already been married off. The promises of reopening the schools came and gone. Today, Afghanistan is the only country in the world that forbids girls from attending to schools. This week, you are all here to propose solutions to transform education to all. But you must not forget those who left behind, those who are not lucky enough to be at school at all. Show your solidarity with me and millions of Afghan girls. You must work together to demand the reopening of the girls' schools and also protection of our rights. fund to our education system in Afghanistan. Critical resources are needed, as we should make sure that all children access to education, even as crisis continues. If you think that Afghan girls deserve the right of their education, so do not let me and my sisters in Afghanistan to become the victim of the global politics. Do not let our country to become the cemetery of our goals and dreams. Thank you.
Such brave young girls, such powerful words. We must not erase girls' existence into society. We have to let them learn. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Elisaveta and Sumaya. Thank you for your powerful message. A round of applause once again, please, for these brave young ladies who are speaking truth to power today. And now it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome to the stage Nobel Peace Prize laureate and UN Messenger of Peace, Malala Yousafzai.
Seven years ago, I stood on this platform, hoping that the voice of a teenage girl who took a bullet in standing up for her education would be heard. On that day, countries, corporates, civil society, all of us committed to work together to see every child in school by 2030. Yet halfway to that target date, we are facing an education emergency. Let's remind you once again what's happening. In Afghanistan, Taliban have banned girls like Sumaya from their education. In Uganda and Pakistan, droughts and floods are ravaging homes like the ones where Vanessa and I grew up. And conflict and violence in countries like Ethiopia, Ukraine, and other countries are keeping girls like Elisaveta out of the classroom. If you are serious about creating a safe and sustainable future for the children, then be serious about education. You have heard enough about how education transforms lives, strengthens economies, and contributes to a more peaceful world. You know every country, community, and corporation would benefit from every girl having access to safe, quality, and free education. And if you are still in doubt about the impact of education, go ask a girl. She will tell you what education means to her. Most of you know what exactly needs to be done. You must not make small, stingy, and short-term pledges, but commit to uphold the right to complete education and close the funding gap once and for all. You must use the power you have to take action. Allocate 20% of your budgets to education. High-income countries increase aid, cancel debts, and set fair global tax system so that low-income countries can spend more on girls. Remove gender bias from curricula. Improve content and make schools safe for girls, and work together with those who are the closest to the challenges to transform education. Today, you have heard from Vanessa, Sumaya, and Yelizaveta. They join millions of young people from around the world who have written demands in the Youth Declaration, and they stand ready to lead the way. Soon, you will hear from young leaders, Ulysses and Karimot, on behalf of youth around the world. I hope in another 7 years, we will speak to you again. But instead of urging you to help us, we will be cheering and celebrating the progress you have made for girls. When you leave this room today, please ask yourselves, how many more generations are you willing to sacrifice? How long will you make girls wait for what you have promised? How many more times do we have to stand on this stage to be heard?
Buenos días, líderes mundiales.
Good morning, world leaders.
Good morning, world leaders. My name is Karimot Odebode from Ibadan, Nigeria, and with me here is
Ulises Brenji from Argentina. The world is going through multiple crises, and we, the youth of the world, are suffering the most from the impact of decisions that we did not make. We have had enough.
Our holy source of hope and resolution is to transform education. Education is our future, and the future is now. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that will not come again. And so we are taking matters into our own hands.
The time is now for you to listen to young people. We are no longer accepting your silence. We are no longer leaving the tune to play itself. Over the last few months, we mobilized our peers at the global, regional, national, and grassroots levels to share our stories, our voices, our pains, and our needs for a better education.
The commitment and passion to this was a clear sign of the importance of this very moment. From Alien in Lebanon, despite blackouts in the middle of the night, she led discussions. To Jean-Marie, who lives in the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, and gathered the voices of over 80 young people who share their vision.
The Youth Declaration is the collective vision of 500,000 young people from over 170 countries across all regions. This is the start of a global movement.
This declaration will guide each one of you into the successful and meaningful engagement of young people as a founding document that will remind you whether you are failing us or not. So far, you owe us.
We are speaking on behalf of all of them to call on you, world leaders, to honor the responsibility you have been given.
We demand that our voices be heard,
our lived experiences heard,
our demands addressed,
our efforts, leadership,
and agency acknowledged. From now on, we are equal partners at the decision-making table.
We demand an intersectional approach based on principles of human rights,
sustainable development,
gender equality,
climate justice,
inclusion, diversity, but most of all, solidarity.
We demand you take responsibility and act now. We know that there is money and resources available. We know what needs to be done, and we know how to do it. So, what have you not? We will not stop until everyone in every village, highland, city has access to quality education, which is a fundamental human right.
What part of history do you want to belong to? The ones condemning our education?
Or the ones who transform education? We, the youth of the world, raise our hands for SDG 4,
committing to holding you accountable because we have no other choice. It is our lives and our future.
Will you join us and act?
What a powerful declaration. Thank you to each of our incredible youth contributors. Their voices matter the most. Please, another round of applause for our youth contributors. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go off script for just a moment and tell you about a scene I just witnessed backstage. It is that of a young Afghan girl who, after delivering her speech to you here at the General Assembly, was in tears backstage. Because while she's here physically, her heart and her mind are back in Afghanistan, thinking about her sisters, her cousins, her girlfriends, who are not in school today. Just put that image in your heads. A young Afghan girl at the United Nations in tears because she feels powerless today. It is up to you, all you leaders here today, to make sure that we do not abandon these young Afghan girls. Please. They must go to school. Let them learn. Now, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard from the world's young people and a number of distinguished leaders. Let us now turn to the second part of this Leaders' Day opening. We'll shortly begin a discussion with UN leaders and two amazing voices from civil society and the teaching profession about how this transformation of education can be advanced in concrete terms in countries, in communities, and most important of all, in classrooms. The purpose of this panel will be to move to a substantive and political discussion around bringing that transformation to all learners, no matter what the local context. Our distinguished panelists will notably be touching upon the critical role the international community and the United Nations development system must play in supporting this translation of words into concrete action. And our exchanges will be further enriched by the perspective of two critical stakeholder representatives in this transformation, persons with disabilities and teachers. So please join me now in welcoming to the stage, right here, Ms. Catherine Russell, Executive Director of UNICEF and Chair of the UN Task Team on the Transforming Education Summit, Mr. Hulin Zhao, Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Unit, Ms. Winnie Byanyima, Executive Director of UNAIDS, Mr. Filippo Grandi, High Commissioner of UNHCR, Mr. Jose Vieira, Advocacy Director at the International Disability Alliance, and Mr. Mugwena Maluleke, Secretary General of the South African Democratic Teachers Union and Vice President for Africa of the Executive Board of Education International. Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here and for stepping in for this very important conversation, no doubt. Thank you. Ms. Catherine Russell, let me start with you, Executive Director of UNICEF. Now, as you walk into the UN Plaza, the UNICEF installation highlights that only 1 in 3 10-year-olds globally can read and understand a simple story, which is quite shocking, isn't it? So after governments set out their commitments today, what must the UN family, the UN system as a whole, do to ensure that transformation translates into clear improvements for the world's most vulnerable learners?
Well, first, I think what you said is exactly right, that it should be shocking. I hope everyone in this room is shocked by that number because it's really devastating to understand the impact of that on children. And I think the young people, having their voices here is so important because you hear their impatience, right? They want us to solve these problems. It's absolutely clear that children, especially the most marginalized children, that's girls, that's children with disabilities, children living in humanitarian crises, are facing a true crisis in education. And you know, we say crisis so much around here that sometimes you lose track of it, but this is a crisis. I'm glad we're here, we're discussing this issue, and we're highlighting the changes that have to be made. But I have to say that this is an urgent problem, and it's not going to happen. Solving this problem is not going to happen without a commitment from country leaders like we heard from the President of Sierra Leone. It's going to take concrete steps to ensure that all children are being educated. We, at UNICEF and other parts of the United Nations, will help. We are here to help. We will work to ensure that all children learn the basics, that they can read, that they can do their numbers, they can continue to learn. And we will support their mental health and their digital inclusion, which are absolutely critical. We need to support teachers, principals, parents, and we need to monitor and measure our progress to ensure that there's successes and failures, and we know what they are and we can learn from them. Adequate funding is absolutely key to this, and we all have a role to play in helping governments fund education, including ways to alleviate the debts of poor countries, which are really devastating and are making it very difficult. We're all here today because we're educated, as the SG said. Our children, no doubt, are well educated. Who doesn't deserve that same opportunity? So today is an important step, but it really is a first step, and we have to see it that way. Looking back on this day, we will have failed miserably if we don't ensure that education is a reality for all children.
Thank you very much, Ms. Russell. Thank you. You touched upon the challenges there, of course. Let me bring you into the conversation, Mr. Hulin Zhao, Secretary General of the ITU. Speaking of the need to reach all children, last year, 2 in 3 children and youth had no access to the internet, of course, when the world went virtual. So drawing on those lessons learned during the pandemic, what actions do you think, Mr. Zhao, need to be taken today to ensure that digital connectivity is a game changer in this global effort to transform education?
Thank you very much. First, let me just thank the summit to bring ITU to the stage. I come to this hall many years, but never come to this stage. So I'm very pleased to join this panel. Now, you know, ITU created 1865. We put our technologies of communications as our main task. But however, we also pay attention to support the education system. You know, that in the last century, with our newest technologies like broadcasting, satellite, we provide tele-education to provide courses through television, broadcasting, and by satellite. And over the long period, we noted that this now needs to be further upgraded. So that at the beginning of this year, of this century, we launched our initiative to connect schools, because to provide courses may not be enough. And you mentioned these figures, and we heard a lot of shocking statistics. We know that this is somehow very important for our planet, for our world, that you know, we have to give our children and give our schools very good opportunities of equal education with good quality of education. So that we, ITU, you know, try to set up some kind of level. For example, you know, through our wishes process, we try to encourage our world to have all schools be connected by 2015. But unfortunately, we are still looking at this issue. And we also work very closely with many UN agencies to promote this. Like even, you know, I talked with you to see how can ICT assist refugees, and you kindly support our proposal. And also, you know, we worked with UNESCO to have e-education, and we worked with ILO for providing training for Africa youth to increase their digital skills. And of course, recently we worked with UNICEF to launch the GIGA project to connect the schools. So all this, I think that is quite necessary, but still, I see the big gap. And the pandemic helps us a little bit in such things that we have more people connected, more children connected, more schools connected, but we still see the big gap there. And with this pandemic, we see the power of ICT, not only for telecommunication, but for almost everything, for all the ecosystem. And we also see the good power to support our education system. And I made my proposal at the last TESS Advisory Committee that maybe ITU could work with UNESCO and education system to provide some kind of standard making process to help our schools to share their data, to share their practice, to share their curricula. And we also encourage our members to training teachers and to encourage SMEs to provide good app and to provide local contents to help our society to understand the situation today. So that is what we are doing, but still, I'm afraid that we still have a lot of things to do. And the lesson we learned from the previous call to connect everybody quickly and not leave anybody behind. And that is our call from Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres. He announced that at this place, 2020, and we see still a lot of challenges here, so that we need to work together. And ICT will try to do their best to support all the ecosystem and then to reach the goals.
There's urgency, as you say, to transform both the content and delivery of education, of course, but also to work across all sectors, as you said. Thank you very much for your remarks. Let's go a bit deeper into that issue of working across all sectors with you, Ms. Winnie Byanyima, Executive Director of UNAIDS. The necessity to break down the silos and connect the dots between education, health, and gender. How can we work together across constituencies and sectors to harness the power of education to transform systems, while also advancing issues like gender equality, of course?
Thank you, Folly. It's a great honor to be on the panel with my colleagues from the United Nations. Catherine talked about crisis, and that we say the word so often, and we it becomes normalized. It shouldn't. And I'm going to put here another crisis that we have to pay attention to. And that's the crisis of HIV/AIDS and the havoc the devastating impact it's having on adolescent girls and young women, particularly in Africa, but also all over the world. Let me put some shocking data here for you. Our data, UNAIDS data for 2021, showed that in sub-Saharan Africa, 4,000 girls were getting newly infected you might think every year, or even every month. No, every week. 4,000 of our girls are getting newly infected every week. And if that's not shocking enough, 6 out of 7 of new infections, HIV infections amongst teenagers between the age of 15 and 19, 6 out of 7 are girls. That's how disproportionate the impact is, the risk is of HIV. This is a crisis, because when a girl is infected at that early age, there's no cure for HIV. That marks the rest of their lives, their opportunities. But here's the good news. The good news is that we know, again from our research, that if a girl completes secondary education, never mind if the quality isn't even there yet, as it should be there, never mind if it's just being in the 4 walls of a classroom up to the end of secondary school, that risk of infection reduces by 50%. 50%. Now, if in that school space you also tackle certain issues to make the school space even more safe, for example, you introduce there what is called comprehensive sexuality education. I know the word is contentious because of tradition and religion and culture, but call it what you want. But if you give a girl life skills to know about her body, how she will look after it, how it will transform, and she knows how to be safe, you reduce the risk further. If you take out of the school space sexual harassment, and that's by addressing toxic masculinities, this idea that for a boy to be a boy, a man to be a man, they must be aggressive, they must force themselves on a girl or a woman. If we take that out, if we tackle it and show that there's peaceful masculinity for boys and bring that in the school space too, we reduce the risk even further. So, who can do this? We realize that we need to work across sectors, and that's why our joint partnership was formed. That's why the UN brought 11 agencies together to fight HIV/AIDS. Because HIV/AIDS isn't just a disease. A pandemic is more than health, as you can see. It's education, it is health, it is human rights. So we've come together. UNICEF, UN Women, UNFPA, UNESCO, and us UNAIDS, who bring the partnership together of the UN on HIV/AIDS. And we are working together with governments, with girls' movements on the ground, with corporates to push for universal secondary education, get the girls in the classrooms, and start to work on the policies that will reduce their risks. And here's the last piece of good news. 12 countries in Africa have stood up and embraced this initiative we call Education Plus. The 12 countries, from the president to the first lady to ministers of education, of health, and of gender equality, they are coming together to champion the right for a girl to be in a classroom and in a safe classroom. This is what we are doing, and in a partnership across sectors.
A great example, really, of how all UN entities and bodies are working together to push forward this initiative. And just a reminder, an important reminder that given the examples you gave us, that education is not just a fundamental human right, but also a key enabler for achieving progress of the Sustainable Development Goals, of course.
Absolutely, and if I might add, this initiative doesn't only reduce the risk of HIV, it reduces the risk of teenage pregnancies, of early marriage, and of violence against women and girls. So many outcomes through one initiative.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ms. Winnie Byanyima, for giving us that example and for talking about the experience of UNAIDS dealing with this issue. Let me bring you into the conversation, Mr. Filippo Grandi, High Commissioner for UN Refugees, the UN Refugee Agency. We heard a powerful message, and I'm not sure you were able to hear it, Mr. Grandi, from Liza, from Ukraine. And I wanted to ask you what education transformation means for refugees and people who are displaced by conflict, by climate change. What does it mean for them? What does it look like for them?
Thank you, and thanks for having me. It's always so difficult to speak after Winnie, but anyway, I'll do my best. And because she said it all in a way. But let me maybe take it from a little bit more personal perspective. I've worked in crisis situations with refugees for more than 30 years. And one thread that I have observed is that for people impacted by crisis, including refugees, displaced people, education is an enormous priority. It is more a priority for them sometimes than the program meant to help them. And we need to reverse that. You know, I've worked for many years with Afghan people, with Palestinians, populations that have been affected by crisis for so long. education is a priority. I've seen parents of young refugees making incredible sacrifices with the little resources that they have to allow their children to go to school. Why is that? I think that is important for everybody. Education, we've heard it this morning in so many ways, is important for everybody. But for people who've lost it all, whether because their homes have been destroyed or because they had to flee, education is crucial. Education is identity. Education is opportunity. Education is hope, a much underrated frame of mind that we should support all the time. And for people who hopefully will then get out of crisis, education is an investment in their future so that they can play a role in reconstructing their countries, their communities, or if they're refugees that get resettled, they can contribute to other communities hosting them. There's 100 million people today that are refugees and displaced. Half of them are children. And they are part, these children, of the hundreds of millions of children in crisis that we've heard so much today. And as we heard, we have made a lot of progress in enrollment of children in crisis, of quality of education. But I am very worried. If you look at the themes that this General Assembly will deal with, climate, war, hunger, all of these are factors of crisis that risk making us backtrack from the gains that we have made. I'm just back from the Middle East, where I visited Syrian refugees. In so many places, due to the lack of resources, Syrian girls are getting married very early, and that means dropping out of school. So the gains that we've made in the past few years, we risk losing them. And finally, just to say two things. What do we need to do? I think that the key word here is inclusion. You know, in the old days, in crisis, we tended to construct education or other programs ad hoc for people that are in crisis. Now, I think the focus, as the compacts on refugees says very clearly, the focus is including them in national system. Inclusion doesn't mean integration forever. It means inclusion during the period during which they need the protection of another state. And this applies to displaced, but it applies also to girls, to people with disability, all those people that are particularly impacted by crisis. And this means two things essentially: good policies of inclusion, of inclusive education by governments, and resources, resources, resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Grandi. Thank you. And just to pick up on inclusion, you talked about inclusion. I want to bring in Mr. Jose Vieira now, the Advocacy Director at International Disability Alliance. Mr. Vieira, what are your reflections on what we just heard, and how do we collectively ensure that inclusion, inclusive access to education becomes a norm and no longer an exception?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, colleagues and friends, I grew up in a city where my blind fellows dreamed of learning music to become part of a blind national choir or learn carpentry to make some money. That's all what they dreamed about, but not because that's all what they wanted to do, but because of what the system offered them as opportunities. Special schools and segregated education system, that's all what they were able to provide. This morning, we heard the Excellency Secretary General in his introductory remarks, the question of, without education, where we would all be. And the answer that I have to give you all on learners with disabilities, the answer is outside school. The 240 million learners that even before pandemic had less opportunities than others attending school are outside the system, and therefore they will not have more dreams than my fellows blind in Argentina a couple of decades ago. Colleagues, I'm more helpful and hopeful if I leave this room later today hearing many more of you talking about persons with disabilities and learners with disabilities. So far, I have heard very little today. But we do have an opportunity. And panelists here have said education means entity, identity, investment, opportunity. But let me add one more thing. It has to be for all. Inclusive education is not only good for learners with disabilities, but it's good for all. Finally, we come to this meeting, to this summit, with the hope of seeing education being transformed. But we also want to make our contribution. And our contribution is a call to action for everyone. Colleagues, we need more national budgets allocated to learners with disabilities. Without budget, SDG 4 will not be achieved. Colleagues, we need learners with disabilities being able to access education systems. Assuming that at least 10% of learners are learners with disabilities in any country, we need to plan accordingly. Last but not least, this call to action that is a result of a civil society effort by the International Disability Alliance, the International Development and Disability Consortium, and the Global Campaign on Education, call upon all of you to do more if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Señores y señoras.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is no time left. The time to wait has expired.
Thank you.
So much. Thank you, Mr. Vieira, for those powerful remarks. Thank you so much. Education has to be for all, and we need to emphasize that. We keep talking about equality, but very often we do forget about, not forget, but we tend to put aside the idea of education also reaching people who have disabilities. So thank you so much. Education, as you said, is not a privilege, but a global public good and a fundamental human right. And each and every learner across the globe has the right to it. Thank you once again, Mr. Vieira. And let me come to you now, Mr. Mogwena Maluleke, who's the Secretary General of the South African Democratic Teachers Union. We saw, Mr. Maluleke, the dramatic educational disruption that the pandemic brought, and as well as the broad national consultations carried out in the lead up to this summit. We saw the critical role that teachers play. I know all parents during the pandemic realized how critical this role of teachers are, because we couldn't do it very often teaching our own children. So where do teachers fit in all of this transformation for education that we're calling for today? And how do we support teachers to become agents of transforming education?
Thank you so much. And Excellencies, colleagues, thank you for the honor and the privilege for us to be here. I think allow me to be a little bit personal so that we can understand how the teachers fit into everything that has been said here. I have been a teacher for 34 years. But today I am not speaking for myself. I'm speaking on behalf of the 32 million teachers that are represented by Education International through our 383 member organizations around the world. I was born on a farm in the apartheid South Africa. There was no school on the farm. So I was not allowed to go to school until I was 9 years old. And when I was allowed to go to school, I had to cross the river by swimming during rainy season to go and access education. I worked as a child laborer. I worked in the morning. I worked after school until 7 o'clock in the evening. So where is the agency of the teachers in all this? So education has expanded my world, but not only because of the education and the knowledge I received, but importantly, in the human interaction with my teachers. I was determined and turbocharged by my internal moral engine to be part of that world. Yet since teachers didn't generally look like me, I knew that becoming one could mean a world of difference for the students who do. From my work as a teacher, my understanding of the power of collaborative professionalism and organizing grew. Individuals can become heroes, of course, but a movement can transform the course of history. And that's where the teachers come in all what we have had today. We are to build a movement to transform education that will be responsible if we are individuals who cannot achieve that. It is only possible if we become partners in real sense of the word and focus very clearly on what it takes to achieve SDG 4. And it's very simple. Free, quality education for every student. The needs are very simple to restate. The first is we need 69 million teachers to join the teaching profession. But not only to join, we need to bring them in, we need to keep them in the teaching fraternity, in the profession. But to do that, I have learned as a child, as a young man who joined the teaching fraternity, that we need to create transformative environment. We need decent salaries for the teachers. We need to trust the teachers and allow them to exercise that professional autonomy in what they are doing. That's where the agency of the teachers are, because they build the nation, they build all the profession, and they build characters, and they build relationships. So therefore, we need to be able to support them. The second, us that we are here as excellencies to say, please, wherever you are, remember the teachers. Remember and trust the teachers. Trust them so that they can be able to exercise their pedagogy, the knowledge that they have, to be able to interact with our children and be able to challenge them to become critical human beings. And the third one that we need is to making sure that this profession is heavily funded. Because if we are not going to fund infrastructure, if we are not going to allow each and every student to have the necessary resources for them to be able to learn, we have seen how the pandemic has exposed those inequalities, and we are here, excellencies, to say, remember the children, remember the teachers. Let's make sure that when we leave this assembly, we are able to see action. And action is only if we can support the teachers, making sure that there is funding for education, making sure that no child is left behind. And that is what we are here for. We are here to build a movement, and that is our charge.
Thank you so much.
And that is our partnership.
Thank you so much for your commitment. Thank you. A round of applause, please, for Mr. Maluleke. Speaking on behalf of all teachers in the world, we appreciate your work. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our panelists for such a great discussion, which truly highlighted the essential dimension of the transformation of education that is related to support and investing in teachers, as we heard. Thank you all very much. Once again, our panelists, a round of applause, please, for Catherine Russell, Executive Director of UNICEF, Mr. Hulin Zhao, Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Unit, Mr. Winnie Byanyima, Mr. Filippo Grandi, Mr. Jose Vieira, and Mr. Mugwena Maluleke. Thank you once again. A round of applause, please, for our panelists. Thank you for a very insightful conversation. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, what a wealth of ideas and opportunities for genuine change. Our panel discussion highlighted once more that transforming education is a very complex task that calls for collective mobilization now, today, not in 10 years, not in 5 years, today. Thank you all once again for joining us for this session, a session which started us off in the right direction for transforming education together. In just a little while, don't go yet, we have a very big surprise for you, by the way. Can I just say, huge surprise coming. So a reminder that we have an exciting program ahead of us today. In just a little while, there'll be 3 parallel sessions taking place in 3 different rooms in this building, including the Leaders Roundtable and spotlight sessions on initiatives such as girls' education, financing, and digital connectivity. So I really welcome you to go and check out all those 3 sessions that are happening throughout the afternoon. And then join us again later here in the General Assembly Hall for the closing ceremony with the Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Amina Mohammed. But before we go, as I said, we have a big surprise. Before we go, we have one final treat for all of you. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. I'd like to welcome to the stage an international music sensation, a Grammy Award-winning singer and songwriter, and a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. Please welcome to the stage, Angélique Kidjo. Woo!
Good morning, everybody. How are y'all doing? You doing okay? I'm really happy and honored to be here with you today, especially today, because education is my... And with UNICEF, I've seen firsthand the benefits of education on the communities, on the families, and the countries. So for me, I don't have to be convinced. You perhaps need convincing. And if you need convincing in 2022, there is something wrong about what we have been doing for so long. So if we don't invest in the girls' education, in the children's education, we have no power. There's no power without education. And here is the place of power. We have leaders here, and your leadership has to be investing in education and in health. How can anyone tell me here, I love my child, I love my children, yet you don't invest in their education? What kind of people are you? What kind of parents are you? So this song that I'm about to sing is to thank parents, people, leaders that believe in education and invest in education. So, as you know me already, you're gonna have to sing. There's no pass. There's no way you can walk in here with me here without you singing it. Okay? So I'm gonna teach you the song. Kelele, kelele, and you answer, oh kelele, baba. Kelele, kelele, oh kelele, baba. Okay, let's start again. You looking at me like, what's up? So I'll go, kelele, kelele, and you go, oh kelele, baba. Kelele, kelele, oh kelele, baba. Let me hear it. Kelele, kelele. Kelele, kelele. You know it, but be in rhythm. When we start, it's gonna be faster than that. You ready? You ready? All right, Dominique, let's do it. Aburo mi mojarello, 같이 쉐이쉐어좀미. Aburo mi mojarello, 같이 쉐이쉐어좀미. 이완이 어머라 어머 바바, 이완이 어머라 어머 바바, 이완이 어머라 어머 바바, 라로니 몰라 시쉐오. Kelele, kelele, oh kelele, baba, come on. Kelele, kelele, oh kelele, baba. Kelele, kelele, oh kelele, baba. Kelele, kelele, oh kelele, baba. Oh.
아부로미 모자렐라 같이 쉐이쉐오좀미 아부로미 모자렐라 같이 쉐이쉐오좀미 이원이여 몰라 어머 바바 이원이여 몰라 어머 바바 이원이여 몰라 어머 바바 라로니 몰라 시셰우 kelele ikelele okelele baba come on y'all kelele ikelele okelele baba kelele ikelele okelele baba kelele ikelele okelele baba ba jeni logun odurere baba jere baba o ahaba ba jeni logun odurere aye baba go jule ahaba ba jeni logun odurere baba jere baba o ahaba ba jeni logun odurere aye baba go jule maso 이완이 어머 알라 어머 바바 이완이 어머 알라 어머 바바 오 헤이 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 오 케레레 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 아무렴이 모자렐라 같이 쉐이쉐어 좀비 하이와니 어머 알라 어머 바바 이와니 어머 알라 어머 바바 오 헤이 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 Donnie Jensen guitar.
Angélique Kidjo!